Hi everyone, this is supply chain management and logistics. Today we have a new issue that is supply chain coordination. So let me get my PowerPoint slide I already posted on the Cyber Campus. Again, today's issue is supply chain coordination in chapter 10 of our textbook. Probably this is the last issue I cover in this whole semester. I think I already explained this concept of a supply chain coordination before, but if I have to explain again, that is, under the supply chain coordination, all the supply chain members in all stages of a supply chain system make their decision and take actions together in order to maximize total supply chain profit. You have to understand this is quite different from how to learn the supply chain system in traditional way. In traditional supply chain system, all the supply chain members are supposed to make their decision and take action individually in a way to maximize their own profit. So, but on the other hand, in order to realize supply chain coordination, you have to let all the supply chain members to make their decision and take action together, all together, in order to maximize not each member's profit, instead, the total supply chain profit. So in fact, in order to realize supply chain coordination, every supply chain member has to understand that his action that have a huge impact the other members' outcome. So it's quite important to understand there is a close interrelationship among all the stages under the supply chain system. So a good example is that what we learn from the inventory management. As we learn, the inventory policy on one stage has a huge impact on the other stages, the inventory amount. On the other hand, it's quite difficult to have the supply chain coordination. There must be 100 reasons why is it so much difficult to realize supply chain coordination. On the other hand, if I have to choose two most important reasons that is not having the supply chain coordination, that is, the first one is that the different stages in the different supply chain member have a different objectives and the goal to achieve. Okay. So a good example is like a situation of a relationship between the manufacturer and the buyer. Manufacturer, of course, they try to have a very consistent production rate to save the manufacturing cost. But on the other hand, the buyer, because the buyer may have a very fluctuating the demand over the time, so the buyer tried to match between the demand and the orders that he places to the manufacturer. So there's a certain the conflict between the manufacturer and the buyer. The manufacturer tried to provide a consistent amount of product to the buyer, but on the other hand, for the buyer, they try to keep changing the amount of order each time whenever he needs. Okay. So that's why it's kind of obvious too that in every moment in the supply chain system, that we have to expect some amount of the conflict that among the supply chain members. And another issue is about the information movement. Okay, so this is also we learned before, that is that because normally orders could be very different from the demand. So that's why. So as we move through the supply chain system, that the stages may have a very distorted information about the demand. So that's why that much is very difficult to have the supply chain coordination. So in fact, later on, I'm going to explain much more detail, but one of the important requirement to realize supply chain coordination, whatever that is, the supply chain coordination program is, that is the most important basis is in fact, the information sharing. They need to share that correct information about the demand between the different stages in the supply chain system. So let me move to the next page. So next good question is why we have to pay attention to the supply chain coordination? Because if you fail to have a supply chain coordination, every bad thing can happen, okay? Such as the manufacturing cost will increase because it's going to be very hard to have the consistent the production amount. And also, you should have a huge amount of inventory in your warehouse. That much, you have to pay a lot of cost for holding the inventory. And also because of the unstable, the demand, and also inconsistent the manufacturing amount. So that's why you have to have a very long lead time. And also you have to pay a lot of the transportation costs because you may have a very inconsistent amount to deliver each time. And also because of that inconsistent the amount of deliver. So that's why the cost for shipping and receiving could be increased. And also, even though you have a huge amount of inventory in your warehouses, because the demand is unstable, so that's why you're not able to provide a good service to your customers. So you may have just the low level of a product availability. And also, because of a huge conflict among the supply chain member, that probably you are not able to expect a good relationship among them. And after all, your profit will decrease, and then the bad thing happens. And especially you have to pay attention to this bully effect. In fact, this bully effect reduce the supply chain profitability, and by making very expensive to provide a good service to the customer and maintaining a good level of product availability. So at this time, I think I have to explain the bully effect in much more details. So let me switch the PowerPoint slide I already prepared. Okay, that is for a while I'm going to pay attention to the bully effect for a while. Okay, so what is a bully effect? I think I already explained about this bully effect before, but basically the concept of bully effect is just a fluctuation in order increase as the firms move upstream in the supply chain system. So as I explained before, this is not about the volume. This is about how much the demand change, orders change as time goes on. Okay. So for example, let me get my note here. So again, I'm gonna just write down that simple supply chain structure, vertical structure, that is starting from the vendor and the top, and the manufacturer, and the wholesaler, and the retailer, and finally, final customer. Okay. So as you learn is, if you move up in this vertical structure of a supply chain system is so-called upstream. If you move down, that is so-called downstream. Okay. So according to this definition of the bully effect, if you move upstream of a supply chain system, you may find that is the variation order is increasing. Okay, so in other words, that the variations order on upstream is much higher than the variations of order in the downstream. So let me get my PowerPoint slide again here. Normally this called is a boolean or whiplash or whiplash. Okay. So why is we have this kind of name here? Okay. So in fact, you might saw before in a movie or whatever that is that the bull whip. So bull whip is, if I have to draw that, there's a handle here and a long string. Okay. So normally this is kind of tool that you use to tame the animal. Okay. But the thing is, the reason why we call this phenomenon as the Bury effect is, so once you just hit the Bury, okay, then is what happens is the movement of this the string is, that is, if you close to the around the handle is very small, okay, up and down. But on the other hand, in the end of this string is a movement is quite a huge, okay, up and down. So in fact, if I go back to the supply chain system, okay, that is, it looks like, right, you have a handle here, okay, and then you hit this brief, okay, then what happened? The movement around the customer is small. But on the other hand, if you move up and down, actually, this movement in the end of this around the bender is huge. Okay, so that's why we call this, I'm sorry, this is wrong, it's not so good picture, but anyhow, you could understand that is why we call this is a Bury effect. Okay, so basically, let me get my PowerPoint slide again. That is the reason why that basically this is that the kind of phenomenon that distorted the demand information as we move up to the supply chain system. Okay. But on the other hand, why we have to pay attention to the display effect? Because it causes a very huge problem in the inventory management, customer services, and revenue, the capacity plan, transportation, and production schedule. Okay. So in fact, behind the story, that is, how could we found this that the Bury effect is actually is the Bury effect first noticed by the one employees in the diaper manufacturing company. Okay, you know the diaper, that is baby diaper. Okay, then is one day this guy, okay, they realized the orders he received from the wholesaler is huge different in each every day. Okay, so he kind of the curious about the fact, so he did his own research. What he did is he go to the retailer and also he's a wholesaler and even the analyze his own data on these own warehouses, and then this graph show you that what he found out from his own research. That is, if you take a look at that, is first this graph is about the customer side. When you take a look at that suddenly the customer's order is, this is just how much the customer order changes over the time. Okay, of course, as we learn from the demand forecasting, okay, the demand is changing over the time. So even customers' orders also changing over time, but not much. But on the other hand, we move upward, okay, of a supply chain system, reach the retailer, that suddenly the demand is changing, but at this time it's quite fluctuated over the time. Okay. What about the wholesaler's order? Okay. In much, when you see that the up and down, this changing is very huge, and also even the manufacturer's order is what is really high. Then, in other words, this is not about volume. It's about the how much change of volume as time goes on. Okay. So as you see that this up and down is very huge as we move from the customer and retailer and wholesaler and the top of manufacturer. Okay. So obviously this is a bully effect. In fact, this is not about the only the diaper manufacturing. Okay. You can find the bully effect is very common in almost every industry. Okay. So in fact, why you have to so much pay attention to that bully effect? Because if you fail to have to solve this problem, you may have a huge problem, huge damage. Okay. So what kind of damage you can expect if you have a bully effect in your supply chain system? That is, you should have a huge amount of inventory. That much, you have to pay a lot of money for that. Okay. But on the other hand, even though you have a huge amount of inventory stock in your warehouses, the many times you will realize you fail to provide a good service to your customer. Why? Because your demand is so much, your order is so much unstable. Okay. So time to time, you may find that even the lost sales, you lose a chance to sell the product to the customer. And also it's going to be very difficult to have a good capacity plan that about the how the what's the size of factory, how many machines you have to rent, put it in your factory, and how many the workers you have to hire working in your factory. It's going to be very hard because you are not able to predict your future demand properly. Okay. And also you're not able to save the cost for delivery the product. Why? Because your amount you have to deliver could be very inconsistent over the time. Okay. It's not going to be very hard to match the exact demand that much. You have to keep changing the amount to deliver as time goes on. Okay. And also it's almost impossible to have a proper production schedule. Is that because it's going to be very hard to have the proper amount have to determine the proper amount of manufacturing the production amount to match the keep the chain unstable demand. So next page is it's time to talk about why we have a bully effect. I think it's a good question. That because if we understand why bully effect happens, then we can understand how to minimize or get rid of a bully effect from the supply chain system. So there are four reasons, main reason why we have a bully effect. Because the first one is what? Because demand forecasts keep updating based on the order history. Okay. So I think I already explained about this when I talk about the POS system. The main point about POS system is that as a manufacturer, you try to understand, you try to get the demand information, not a order. Okay. So you have to believe in the demand, not the order. Okay. Because in many times you realize that is demand is quite different from the order. Okay. So that's the first reason why we have a bully effect, because that the demand forecast is updated based on the order instead of demand. The second reason why we have a bully effect because of a batching. Okay, so what is a batching? Let me get my note here. Is this is quite a common practice in ordering. Okay, so normally when the company order, because this is a convenient way, that is, instead of just order exact amount they're needed, normally the seller set some size of a batch. So such as, let's say this seller saying that batch size is 100, then the buyer is supposed to order only 100 unit the basis. Okay. So in other words, even though the buyer need only 50 units, but the company, the buyer have no choice other than to just order 100 instead of 50, okay, or no order, that's it. Probably he have only the one choice between them, okay, because that the seller said the batch size is 100. So according to this batch, that is buyer can order 100 or even 0 or 200 or 1000. It is possible because this is 100 the basis, unit basis. But on the other hand, with the batch size of 100 unit, the buyer is not able to order like a 50 or 150 or 160 or 240. Okay, this is not possible. Okay, so why batch causes the bully effect? Because even though, such as in these cases, even though the buyer require only the 150 right now, okay, on the other hand, the batch size that proposed by the seller is 100 unit. So for the buyer, only the choices between either order 100 or 200. Most likely is he going to order 200 to fulfill the 150 requirements. Okay. But the problem here is what? Even though the buyer really need only the 150, he has to the order 200 that much. The seller may have the wrong information about the demand because the buyer will order the 200 instead of 150 units. Okay, so this is another reason why we may have a bully effect. Okay, and the reason, the third reason why we have a bully effect is price fluctuation. We learned about this before, okay? Especially the discount, okay? That you understand that the promotion, okay, temporary discount causes the forward buying. Why? Because to take a benefit of the price cut, the buyer will buy a more product in advance, even more than that what he need right now. That is a so-called forward buying. Okay. So again, the problem of forward buying is it will give a wrong information about the demand to the seller. Okay. So then much that is it is very possible to have a bully effect. The last one is a very special situation about rationing and shortage game. That is, let me explain this by drawing something, okay? That is, for example, let's say, this is the market that is have only single supplier, okay, exist. And then there's a 3 customer try to buy this product provided by this single supplier, okay? So basically this first customer wants 10 unit from this supplier and 20 unit for the customer, the supplier, and 30 for the third customer, okay? So total, this market requires 60 unit of this product, but unfortunately, the supplier have a very limited production capacity, so he can provide only the 50. So this is kind of situation of a shortage, okay? So 10 much, how much? The shortage is a 10, okay? So under this situation, most likely happen is that supplier will the rationing the limited amount of product, okay? So how come? Because the customer 1 order the 10 unit, customer 2 order 20 unit, customer order 30 unit. Probably he ordered he just share, just assign this the 1/6 and the 2/6 and 3/6 half to the each customer. So for example, like what? how many product the supplier will give to the third customer? The half of 50, so it's 25. Okay. And then what about the customer 2 may receive that just 15 multiplied by 2/6. And what about customer 1 was just 50 multiplied by 1/6. Okay, then much this customer will receive from the supplier under this shortage situation. This is so-called rationing. Okay, but the thing is, once this customer realizes that this is going to happen, okay, supplier will assign the amount of product he can receive, then what this customer will do? Yes, suddenly he realized that based on the order, because the supplier decided how many product he will send to the customer. So he just wisely the customer may order more than 30 units, such as third customer, even though he needs just a 30 unit, he may order 40 or even 50. So that way he can secure a more product close to the 30 unit that he really require. Okay. Even customer 2 also order not only the 20 unit, even though he need really only the 20 unit, because he knows, the customer too knows that his supplier will that decided how many product the customer to receive depends on the not an actual demand of a customer to the orders placed by the customer to. Okay, the customer one is the same story. Okay, so if this keep happening, then what happened? Then what? Suddenly, because each customer will order more than he need right now, so the information about the demand that received by the supplier will distort it. So bully effect will happen. Okay. So let me get the PowerPoint slide here. Okay. So question is how we can prevent, how we can minimize or get rid of a bully effect. The idea is very simple. You have to provide the accurate demand information to the seller. Okay. The first one is again, that is from the first cause of a bully effect, we can get an implication. That is what? We're using the POS system. So instead, providing order information, try to provide a demand information. Okay. So as a seller, you have to believe in the demand, not the order. Okay. So that way we can minimize the bully effect. What about the second causes of the bully effect? Yeah. From the second causes, I already explained that is bully effect may happen because of the batching. Okay. So how can we prevent that? Okay. So the idea is very simple. Try to make a smaller batches. So previously you have a seller may have a 100 unit batches, but why not have a 50 or 20 or even 10 unit of batches? Okay. So that way we may prevent the bully effect. And also, what about the third causes of a bully effect? So anyhow, you have to have the discount. Okay. Then what should I do? I think I already explained about this, right? I mean, the temporary, the discounts, especially the trade promotion, has the serious problem about the inventory management. Okay, so that's why in order to prevent the problem, okay, probably a good idea is you try to the you try to apply the discount based on the not an order based on the demand. Okay, so one of the specific technique to the prevent the bully effect is everyday low prices is a good example from the Walmart. Okay, so by having the everyday low price, you try to stabilize the price. That way you don't have to have a double effect. Okay. And also, what about shortage cases? The gaming situation. Okay. In this kind of cases, that is that you have to change that, how to ration this the limited amount of product to the seller, to the buyer. Okay, how come? Yeah, from seller, that is, a seller needed to the assigned amount of product to provide to the buyer depends on the buyer's demand, not a buyer's order. Okay, that way we can prevent the Brewer effect that if we do that, that is, a buyer have no incentives to order more, okay, more than what he need right now, okay. And then at the last of this PowerPoint slide, I just provided some of the references of the bully effect, but you have to understand these references is articles from the academic journal. Probably is very hard to read and understand, but still, I mean, it's quite a worth to reading these article if you are really interested in this the Fourier effect. So let me get to the PowerPoint slide here. Go back to the PowerPoint slide about supply chain coordination. Again, that is, if you don't have a supply chain coordination, you may have these all kind of a series. It is very possible you may have these kind of huge problem in your supply chain system, especially the bully effect. Okay, so in fact, the supply chain coordination is one of the good method to solve the problem of a bully effect. Okay. But in order to realize supply chain coordination, you have to handle some of the key issues. Okay, so what kind of key issues do we have to consider? Probably there's 100 different kind of the issues you have to understand and cover to realize supply chain coordination. But if I have to choose the most important, the 4 issues here about the supply chain coordination are just like these. That is, first one is whether the company willing to have the shared information each other. Okay, so in fact, you have to understand, okay, that is, there's a certain reason why it is very difficult to have a supply chain coordination. In order to realize supply chain coordination, one of the important key basis for any kind of supply chain coordination is what? Information sharing, okay? If you don't have information sharing, basically you are not able to realize supply chain coordination. I can say that, okay? But on the other hand, that sharing information is practically very difficult because the most companies, okay, they try to keep secret their information, okay. In these days, especially, information is very valuable, okay, has a price. Okay? On the other hand, in order to realize supply chain coordination, all the supply chain will have to freely share the information, especially information about the demand. Okay. Another issue is about authority to make a certain decision. Okay. In a traditional way, that is that if you take a look at how each the supply chain member make his own decision, that is, of course, each company make the decision on what he own. Okay, if the things is owned by a certain company, that company is supposed to make their decision. It's a decision. Okay, about that thing. Okay, the thing is, under the supply chain coordination, sometimes, many times actually, a certain company even have to make a decision on that this company not owned, okay, does not own. That's the point, okay. So for the company, that is, even though that this building or whatever that machines that is already owned that, but still you have to let that some other company make the decision on your own machines and factory. Okay? It sounds like awkward, but in fact, many times you will realize this is a kind of key requirement for the supply chain coordination. Okay, sometimes you have to give the authority to make a decision on that some product or machines or factory that is you own, okay, to the others. Another issue about the supply chain coordination is who is responsible for paying a certain cost. Again, conventionally, the responsible to pay the cost is quite related to the ownership. In other words, if you own that factory and product, you are supposed to pay the cost for that. But on the other hand, just like authority to make a decision, under the supply chain coordination, many times you realize that is, one supply chain member, even though that he does not own that factory and products and operations, he may have to pay that a certain cost to about that, the factory and product and operations. The last key issue for the supply chain coordination is how to design the proper incentive system. The reason why we need the incentive system is because it is very possible that some supply chain member may lose the money under the supply chain coordination. As I explained before, the supply chain coordination is to maximize supply chain profit, not each member's profit. Because of that, it is very possible someone in supply chain system may lose the money because of a supply chain coordination. On the other hand, in order to realize supply chain coordination and maintaining until we get the expected outcome from the coordination, every supply chain member is supposed to participate in the supply chain coordination. Otherwise, you may not be able to get a good outcome from it. So it's quite a requirement to have every supply chain member involved in the supply chain coordination. So because of that, you have to prepare a proper incentive system to compensate the loss of someone who may have under the supply chain coordination and let them willingly participating in supply chain coordination. I think it's a good time to stop, and let me continue with this supply chain coordination later. So that's it for today. See you next time. Bye.